How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I am making it in the summer in this heat, and it is miserable, but it's fine. We're all fine.
We're just sweating through. We're just riding
E-
on our own sweat
a little
like a slip
bit.
and slide through the summer. You're welcome for that visual.
I was about to say that was a fantastic visual. I love that. Oh, so Rachel, you obviously have a book coming out in September, correct? So Thirsty. And you've written many, many other books, which I adore and love very much. If you just want to briefly introduce yourself for anybody who doesn't already know you, I'll go ahead and open up the floor.
Sure. So my debut novel, The Return, came out in 2020. And then I followed that up with Cackle and Such Sharp Teeth and Black Sheep, which is out in paperback in August. And then So Thirsty, my vampire novel, is out on September 10th. And I kind of pitch it like Thelma and Louise meets Let the Right One In.
That's a very fair comparison. I watched Thelma and Louise this morning to prepare for this
Oh,
interview.
did you?
But yeah, I hadn't actually seen it before, and you really you nailed it. And it was very I was like, holy shit. It just very much lined up so well with So Thirsty, and I'm so fortunate that I've been able to read it as early as I have. It was such a great read, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then among the other books that you listed, I think the first one of yours that I read was Such Sharp Teeth. And man, that book, I think it was one of the first contemporary horror novels that I read. And it just like really redefined what I came to understand horror to be. And it just like really, really rocked my world. So been a fan ever since. And I've been super, super thankful to be able to read So Thirsty. But yeah, if you do want us to go ahead and tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write that novel and the idea to use vampires in this story and all of those good things.
So I've been asked a few times, like, are you going to write a vampire novel? Because I wrote a witch novel, I wrote a werewolf novel. Um, so I've been thinking about it, but I was waiting for the right idea. And then one day I was looking in the mirror and I'm about to turn 35. So I'm like getting to that age where I'm like looking in the mirror, I'm like, am I getting wrinkles? Like what's happening here? Like just staring at the mirror. And so much of my life I've spent agonizing over my reflection. Um, I grew up in the 90s, where, pretty much all my friends and I had eating disorders and there like diet culture was very prevalent. Um, and there was this pressure to be rail thin and to be so beautiful. And I really internalized that and I sort of tortured myself for a really long time. And just as I finally kind of accepted myself to a certain extent, now I'm worried about aging. And I was standing in front of the mirror, just frustrated. And I was like, well, what would happen if I couldn't see my reflection? Because part of vampire lore is they can't see their reflections.
Right.
And part of me was like, the relief. And also, if I was a vampire, I wouldn't age. So awesome. And then the other part of me was like, no, that'd be terrible. Like, what do you mean you couldn't see your own face? Like, you couldn't look at yourself. You couldn't have that connection with yourself. You couldn't have that self-aware. You couldn't appreciate yourself. And I thought of it that way. And I was like, that's a really intriguing idea. And so that's when I started to write So Thirsty. And then, the vampire metaphor changed. And I was thinking about, I mean, it's still with aging, but like it expanded.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about um, desire.
Hmm.
And my editor, when I pitched the book, was like, if you're going to write a vampire story, some people, people expect it to be a little sexy. And I was like, okay, okay, point taken. And I was thinking about like, okay, so there's aging and women dealing with that. And then there's also desire. So vampires need blood to survive. They also want it. And so, like, what if, like, because again, growing up in the 90s, I'm used to deprivation
Hmm.
as something
Yeah.
to aspire to. If
Hmm.
you deprive yourself of food, if you like, Kate Moss, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Like
Yes.
that's something. And also when it comes to sex, like we're taught as like young girls that it's bad and you don't want to be a slut and like, dress conservatively. And I have memories of, being in middle school and getting sat down in an assembly, just girls. The
Hmm.
boys weren't there. The girls were being lectured about our no spaghetti straps. They had to be 2 fingers tipped,
Yes,
two
because
fingers
a
wide.
finger's length is going to make all
Yeah.
of the difference. Yeah.
And then fingertip length through the skirts and like, very much like don't tempt your classmates.
Hmm.
And thinking a lot about like that's and so thinking about all of the things that I deprived myself of or felt ashamed about, and what if my the like what I desired also I needed to survive, like it was
Hmm.
sustenance, like as a human, like what if I needed chocolate cake to live? Like, and my whole life it's like don't touch the cake. But now
Yes.
that's so I was thinking about that idea a lot. In all my books, I want them to work on different levels.
Hmm.
I want it to be entertaining and fun and scary, and then I want there to be depth to it that if somebody wants it, it's there. Um, and so that's I kind of like as I was writing, I was like, "Whoa, that's interesting, and that's interesting." And the same thing happened with Such Sharp Teeth, where I was like,
Yeah.
"This metaphor is just expanding." And so, um, yeah. And then there's also it's also a friendship story because I wanted to take I mean I love female friendship. Well, it's kind of the
Yes.
spine of several of my books, and sort of to explore the two like so my protagonist Sloane is very much like me where she deprives herself she deprived herself and is very insecure and thinking about all this stuff, and then Naomi is the flip side of that. And
Hmm.
so I wanted to explore somebody who's already like balls to the wall. What would happen if you gave them like eternal life and insatiable thirst? Like,
Hmm. Like kind of free
so
reign.
yeah, and to have that foil for Sloane and to have
Yeah.
um that is the central relationship, because if there is going to be some spice, if there is going to be romance, I don't want that to be the whole book. That's not kind
Yeah.
of what I do. I just want it to be the fun B plot.
Well, I think you definitely achieved everything that you mentioned, wanting to get into, either subliminally or, on surface level, because it absolutely is an entertaining read. But, what really hit home for me was all of the deeper things that whenever you read into it, you pick up. And while I didn't grow up in the 90s, my mom was a part of diet culture of the 90s. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember looking at her bookshelf, it was like the South Beach diet, eat this, not that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, the classic whatever. So I think that part of that still lingers, even though we've kind of moved on a little bit as a society, there's parts of that that still linger. And so the other thing too that you mentioned about having the Naomi and Sloane, the idea of deprivation and then indulgence kind of. And that's something that you've toyed with the idea of vampirism with this whole novel that I thought was just incredibly smart and clever. I think that, it's been talked about plenty of times, but your ability to write female friendships, and it reminds me of those memes that you see on the internet. It's like girlhood is a spectrum. It's
Yes.
like the two, yeah, so that's like Naomi and Sloane. And you write
Vampirism is a spectrum.
yes. And you write them so well, even though they're so different. And so I wonder if I was going to ask if there was a inspiration point for each of them that you kind of had, an idea of how to write them. But like you mentioned, you said Sloane is a little more reserved. Like you mentioned, the things that you experience, feeling like she was deprived versus just pretty much writing the opposite. So, I mean, it definitely translated authentically on the page, and it also felt like, oh, these are people that I've known all my life as well. So it's
Oh,
like
thank you.
I've had that friend that pushes me out my comfort zone and makes me so stressed because I'm like, this is not it.
Yeah.
This is not what I want to be doing.
I'm typically the Sloane. I'm typically
Yeah.
the Sloane. Like Sloane is very, but like every once once every like Haley's Comet come once in a while, like once in I don't know how many years, I am Naomi, and when I'm Naomi, it's trouble. But I typically am the more like I relate more to Sloane. I'm typically the one
Hmm.
who's like, I want to go to bed at 10 p.m. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's too loud in here. Like, I'm typically Sloane. Um,
Hmm.
but I've had friends who've pushed me outside my comfort zone, and I'm always grateful for it. And like, I'm reluctant, but I'm grateful for it in the long run.
Yeah.
But like, they're not based. I mean, Sloane is like, all of my protagonists are like a version of me, like a
Yeah.
funhouse mirror, like alternate parallel universe version of me. Um, but I don't base any other, I never base a character on somebody because that's a
Hmm.
recipe for
Oh,
disaster
yeah.
on somebody I know. It's bad enough that sometimes I'll pull specific details from my life and I'm like, that's not you. I just used that detail.
Yeah.
Sorry. I know that's confusing. Don't be mad at me. But the dynamic between Sloane and Naomi, like when they're kind of being quippy with each other,
Hmm.
um, I have that banter with my friend Courtney, who's also
Yeah.
an author. Um, and there's some moments in the book where I'm like, that's something that we would say to each other, or like, so, um, and like we both have, Sloane and Naomi have a dream mall,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Courtney and I have a dream mall. I mean, Courtney and I met in college, not in high school, but
Hmm.
um, so that's something specific that I borrowed from our friendship that I put into the book. So, but they're not, but like, I don't have a friend who's going to be like,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
Naomi. Because then they'd be like, wait, they get to a certain page and be like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
And I
that'd
don't
be a
want to deal with
little,
that. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be a little awful. But I mean, I guess that just goes to say, your writing feels so authentic. It feels like the people you know. Like it genuinely
Thank
feels
you.
like those friends that you've encountered in your life that you've been in these situations and you're like, oh, this so reminds me of X, Y, and Z. And speaking of the Dream Mall, believe in So Thirsty, you talk about a mall with a carousel in it. Um,
Yes.
the Mall of Louisiana is one of the few malls I think that still has a working carousel in it. I haven't seen it run in a long time, but the next time I go, I have to take a picture to send to you
I love
because
a carousel and I love them all. And the two of them together is a dream.
it is like smack in the middle of the food court. So like you're just casually eating and watching
And
kids
with little
go around.
kids, just like,
'Cause that's what everyone wants
there's
to be
one
looking at.
dragging. Yeah.
Yeah. So I random, but I thought about that when I was reading. I was like, oh, I could go see that at the mall if I really wanted to right now. But next time I'll go out and take a picture. Anyway, back to what we were saying. So also the other thing that I wanted to mention, across all of your books in general, with the same kind of strong characterization that you have, the complex female friendships, it's the idea of these strong feminist ideas. And like you mentioned with where this idea for this novel originated, the idea of deprivation or, starving yourself. And I feel like you really balance the idea of gluttony and guilt and like especially female guilt so well in this novel. It's something that really hit close to home for me because I feel like a lot of the time, the idea is that women should feel empowered by certain choices and or deciding to do this or their decisions are made in a place that may be masked of empowerment, but in the end, there's still a lot of guilt. And I think that that's something that reads really true for Sloane. And then, the events of the book make her really kind of reevaluate and face the music of what she wants. And that's something that was so clear to me and it meant so much to me because I haven't really seen that a whole lot in other works of, fiction or horror fiction,
Yeah.
is that unique sense of female guilt. And I wasn't sure if that was something, and also, like I'm a Catholic or former Catholic.
Oh,
So like when
same.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, so whenever I read like Black Sheep, I was like, that was
Yeah.
also very, very relatable. But I felt like that kind of worked hand in hand, even though So Thirsty's not necessarily a religious novel. It's those same feelings of punishment and guilt and all those things. So I didn't know if maybe that kind of played into it, some of what started with Black Sheep into this.
It wasn't intentional, but like I said, like the aging thing that was intentional, the reflection thing was intentional, and then everything else kind of ripples out
Hmm.
in the process of writing. And I think if you're going to talk about indulgence, like the guilt is just so natural.
Hmm.
Like for a lot of my friends, so I know it's not just me, but like I only know my experience. So like guilt is just so like how much of my life have I spent guilting myself and how like again with like that dress code assembly,
Hmm.
like, or, the diet books, like shame, just like so much shame for doing the
Yes.
things that we want. And it really complicates. our relationship with want
Mm-hmm.
because we can never get what we like, go for what we want or get what we want without, to some extent, wondering, do I deserve this? Is this wrong? Um, should, like, there's so many complicated feelings about satisfaction.
Yes.
And, like, I, it's, I think it's really difficult and it doesn't go away. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
thought, you know, as I got older, it would become, I thought a lot of things would get easier as I got older. And I tell you, I was in for a rude awakening. Like, things just get hard, they just get complicated in a different
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Um, and every, like, no, in a way that people don't openly talk about. So, yeah, just a lot of shame around like asking for things that I want, even at this
Mm-hmm.
stage in my life, being 35. Like, I feel like, oh, well, I've made all my big choices are behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just kind of settled into this, like Sloane in the novel, I've sort of like settled into my life.
Yeah.
And it's like you look around and you're like, wait a minute, like what's next? And like for
Yeah.
me, I'm not having children, so it's like this, like, I have so much life left to live.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't want to, society makes it seem like
Yeah.
once you make your big decisions, there's nothing, but there's so much time left.
Yeah.
I think, like, oh, do I work really hard
Mm-hmm.
and not see my friends and family as much because I'm like
Yes.
only working? And like, do I spend all of my income on work trips and then not be able to go on trips with my husband because I spent all my money going to like horror conferences? Like, then I feel guilty about that. Or do I not work as hard and kind of like, I guess it's the having it all thing. But
Yeah.
like, I think to frame it as somebody who doesn't have, as a woman who doesn't have children, like, I think often they think of having it all as like a working mother. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I think it's beyond that too.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and what if there comes a point where you settle into your life and you're like, actually, I don't like this life. Like, actually, like, I I want to like live abroad, or like, just
Mm-hmm.
so many of us just ignore that voice and continue to like just go with what we've already established. But
Yeah.
like, we're still allowed to make choices. Like, we're still
Absolutely.
allowed to shake things up. And I think it's difficult to wrap our minds around that because it's so baked into us that, to ignore hunger, ignore
Mm-hmm.
desire, ignore want.
I remember like I had a very clear conversation with my parents whenever I was in high school. I'm relatively young for like my grade at the time. So like when I graduated, I was only 17. And I was like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to be 17 and I'm supposed to be deciding financially what I'm supposed to be doing for the rest of my life because it is a big deal about where you go to school and what you study and what, because you're kind of, setting yourself up for whatever. And so then
Right.
even whenever, you're in undergrad, yeah, you have some flexibility to change and move around and do some things. But then if you like I went to grad school and then like I locked in with grad school and then guess what? COVID happened. So then
Yeah.
all of the best laid plans kind of up in themselves. And then before I knew it, I was like, you make all of these big life decisions without even really realizing that you're making them. And then it all feels so terminal. Like it is
Yeah.
so set in stone and no and like there's real it's so absurd. There's absolutely no reason that it should be. And I mean, and I know I'm from the South. I grew up in the South, so I've always attributed it to like this older way of life. But it is something that no matter where you're at, the way that society has constructed itself, we're just made to feel like it's these absolutist decisions, and you can't go back and you can't change or change your mind or any of these things. And so I feel like that was a something that you really also nailed with Sloane's character, that feeling of complacency. And I think it's something that women often feel like they experience, but again, like we mentioned before with shame, you don't want to bring it up and you don't want to talk about it. And like the idea of entertaining new ideas or changing your life's trajectory, everybody gets so frightened and frazzled by it. They're like, "You want to do what now?" Like, "Are you sure? Is that really the best move?" And I mean, I totally understand what you mean about how you like even allocate your time, like even beyond finances. Like, how do I spend my time? Do I spend myself, working on my career, or like I get a lot of joy out of everything that I do with the book community and reviewing books. It's like, do I invest more in that and try and get more out of that, or do I spend more time with family or personal level? So all of those things I feel like are so universal to all of us, but like you said, we're just not talking about them.
Yeah, because it's hard to say, like, to vocalize thinking that you might have, like, regret.
Yeah.
And I think the problem with that is we hold in our shame, we hold in our regret, we hold in speaking what's ugly,
Hmm.
and then it gets uglier
Oh,
because
yeah.
we keep it in. Um, but yeah, it's hard. And I think also in this, like, it, I mean, it's always been hard, and it's been hard for different reasons. I think people used to be more judgmental, and now
Yeah.
women have more choices, but there's also um social media now. And it's
Yeah.
hard because it's like everybody else is happy. And I think
Hmm.
we scroll and we're like, oh, everybody else is living these perfect lives. Why don't I feel right in mine? And that can be really isolating. And it's interesting because when I wrote The Return, and that was about my group of friends in my like mid 20s, early to mid 20s. Like we went through, like we all kind of separated, but
Hmm.
we were too embarrassed to ever be like, yeah, things are not good. We would just be like,
Yeah.
everything's great.
Hmm.
Because we were too like, we thought we'd get out of college and everything would make sense. And it was just a mess. And so there was that. And now I think it's kind of like round two of that, where
Hmm.
it's like now we're in our mid 30s and we're like, we've settled into our lives, and it's like, maybe, I feel a little bit antsy. I moved to the suburbs. I never thought I would move to the suburbs, and just being like, I love my house, but like I miss being able to like walk to coffee, and like I'm far away from everybody. Like
Yeah.
but I don't want to say that because I'm like, everybody else is happy, right? Are you guys happy? Like, and so
Yeah.
it's the same thing, just round two, where we just, I think and sometimes we don't even, like, we're so quick to dismiss ourselves, I think,
Hmm.
like when we have our own thoughts of like, we're just like a negative thought. We're just like, nope, get out. Like, I don't want to deal with you. Like, or
Yeah.
you're just like, I often tell myself like, oh, it's a mood. You're moody. Because when I was little, I was moody and dramatic. And so everyone would be like, you're just being moody or dramatic. So that's what I say to myself. I'm like, you're being moody, you're being dramatic. And so I don't take myself seriously. And
Hmm.
because of that, things escalate. And I think I mean, that's something that I gave to Sloan, where she just, um, and I think a lot of us do it, where we just don't listen to ourselves. And then it's easier to pretend that things are fine than to deal with the hard thing. So we don't deal with the hard thing. And then it becomes even harder and harder and harder. So, um, yeah, just a lot of life stuff. What I should probably do is go to therapy, but instead I write books. And I'm like, I can fix my character and then I will be fixed. And then I get to the end of the book and I'm like, oh, like, nope. But
I
lots of
mean,
material each time.
yeah,
So,
I mean, whatever works. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not judging. No, I agree. And like the thing that you mentioned too about growing apart like in your 20s. And what I don't get about it is like it's okay to call it quits on a friendship. It's okay to say, "Hey, this is not we've grown apart. We're like no longer working, our interests are no longer
Right.
the same anymore." And it's just not something that we do. And I don't know if it's like a bluntness that I have to my personality because that is something that I was told whenever I was little was I was too honest. That like I'm just, I don't like spending time with people who I don't feel like genuinely want to spend time with me or like our interests are not aligned or it's too forced. So and like you mentioned, it's just something that we kind of keep kicking this can down the road and it gets worse and worse and worse. So um, it's definitely something that I think a lot of people feel and experience, unfortunately. But I will say I've tried to limit, like I deleted my Facebook and I've gotten off of like my personal Instagram. I'm really just on my Bookstagram. And I will say that my quality of life, I think, has probably gone up since doing so.
Yeah, it's
Um,
hard. I mean, we only post the good stuff, really.
Yeah, and
So,
it's a constant comparison, and it's
yeah.
not we were not meant to be exposed to this
No.
much information in
Mhm.
no way, shape, or form ever.
Nope. Nope.
So, but yeah, so those are all of the deep underlying parts of So Thirsty.
Yeah.
You also write your books with a lot of humor and a lot of heart. And is that something that you go in intentionally being like, oh, let me put in a little bit of levity here? Or is it just something that kind of flows naturally to you whenever it comes? Like I'm thinking, for instance, in So Thirsty, there's a Naomi and Sloane are having a conversation, and Naomi says something about Sloane's Dyson vacuum, and she
Oh,
gets particularly offended. And I'm like, that it's organic. And I just wonder if it's something that you plan or if you just let it happen naturally.
I let it happen naturally. I think I write because I write contemporary,
Hmm.
like I want everything in my books to be grounded except the supernatural, like except what's
Right.
like I want everything to feel completely real except for the thing that very much isn't.
Hmm.
And because of that, like I want like in Such Sharp Teeth when Rory is like realizes she's been like bitten by a werewolf, she Googles, what do you do if you've been
Yeah.
bitten by? Because that's what I would do.
Yeah.
That's what
That's the real
most,
life application.
yeah. And like, and with, and So Thirsty, like Naomi and Sloan are best friends. They've been friends for like almost 2 decades. So even in this crazy situation, their dynamic is not going to change instantaneously. Like, they're still going to fall into those old rhythms and like, pick at each other. Like, it's not gonna like if my best friend and I went through something horrific, like afterwards we would still be interact with each other the same way.
Hmm.
And so I really just think about like what's in character. Like, for somebody like Sloane or Annie from Cackle, they're both a little
Yeah.
self-deprecating. And so their
Hmm.
humor is going to be like that. And Rory is a little bit like witty and like, you know, sarcastic and so like that's part of her character. It's not going to change because there's horror going around. Like
Right.
um when my one of my friends got married and she rented out a house to have her wedding in, and the night before the wedding, her future husband and the bridesmaids were staying in the house and the power went out, and the house is like at the top of this like 3 mile long driveway at the top of a hill in like remote, but not so remote that we couldn't look down on the mountain and see other houses still had power. So just
Oh,
ours was
yeah.
gone. And we were all joking about how like we're like there's an axe murderer outside. And like it's like when we're scared, that's what we do. We default to humor. Like we don't immediately default to like my characters don't know they're in a horror novel. They're just
Yeah.
like being themselves. And so I think about that and I just kind of let it flow. I'm never like, I'm going to insert a joke here.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll be like, should I take this out? And then I'm like, no, I'm making myself laugh. So I'm going to leave it in. But yeah. And then in terms of like the heart, like I kind of have to put some hope in my books or else like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Like
Yeah.
I know it's horror and I like, I'm happy to get dark, but like, I feel for myself writing it and for my readers at this point in my career in particular, because I have enough books out. Like if I were to just like kill everybody, people would be like, like that's
Yeah.
not what people come to me for.
Right.
That's not what like the way I build my narratives, it's never worked out in a way that that's made sense. I might write a sad book, but I'm not like, I don't set out to like emotionally torture people. I like set out to like tell a fun story, like have like make it scary and entertaining, and then like have it explore things, like talk about the
Hmm.
things we don't talk about, wrapped up in a monster metaphor.
Yeah.
So I I like books that are heavy. I like books that are sad. I like books that mess me up, but that's just not what I am capable of of writing, and um it would be difficult for me to sit in that for the duration of the time that I spend with a novel.
Yeah.
Um, I'm happy to read a sad book or watch a
Yeah.
sad movie because it's contained, but like I
Right.
can't spend a year of my life with something that's heavy. Um, and so like the levity and the like heart and the hopefulness, it's necessary for me to keep doing this. Like I'm on a book
Yeah.
a year schedule,
Mhm.
and God willing, or whoever is I can stay that way. But I couldn't live in that. It'd be too difficult for
Yeah.
me. Um, and yeah, and I just like, I don't know. I want it to be fun. I want to have fun while I'm writing it, because if I have
Mhm.
fun when I'm writing it, people are going to have fun reading it. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's what I want. Like, that's what I want to put out into the world. So,
Yeah. And I mean that absolutely comes through. And I think one of the best things about your writing is like your timing. And like it comes naturally. And I think it's from that authenticity, like you said, like if this was a real person out in the real world, you're trying to place them so squarely in that situation that the dialogue, the plot development, whatever you want to phrase it, those reactions come organically. And it definitely reads that way on the page. And I definitely have fun whenever I'm reading your book.
thank
So
you.
so you're definitely achieving that. So on another note, go ahead and like just talking about your career as a whole. I feel like you have pulled things out of my brain and put them into your books multiple times. We've talked about it before with the AirPods
Oh
and
yeah.
So Thirsty. And then I also wanted to bring up the skeleton that is in the house in Black Sheep. Can
Bartholomew.
Yes,
Yeah.
Bartholomew. I literally have a skeleton in my living room. His name is Boris. And my boyfriend, I've been having him since 2021. Yeah, my boyfriend got him for me for Halloween, and then I wanted him to stay up year round. So then my grandmother made felt hats for him. So he
Oh,
stays up year round, and we just switch out the hats. So right now he's got a summertime hat on.
I
But
love
again, you had that in Black Sheep, and I was like, holy shit, that was
that.
that was close. That was close. Um so yeah, I thought that was really neat. There's a lot,
That's so funny.
on top of like the humor, the heart, the authenticity, there's also really small things like
Yeah.
Boris the skeleton.
Boris. I love Boris is such a great name.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think I named him. I don't remember, but it's not important.
Just take credit. No one will know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like to give my granny the credit for the hats because God knows
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. But I'll take credit for Boris. Anyway, so also I want to talk to you about reading. Obviously, you're an author, you write a lot, this is your career. But I know a lot you blurb books, you read a lot. Is there ever anything that you read to put you in a particular mindset for whenever you're about to write? Or like how does your relationship with reading and writing work hand in hand?
So I think it's very important as a writer to just read as much as you can, like read
Hmm.
voraciously. While I'm drafting, maybe I'll read something that I think is going to help inspire, like be pair nicely with what I'm
Yeah.
drafting. Um, but I like to like read if I'm starting a draft and like trying to like rev up on a new project, I'll read a lot of poetry because
Mm.
that inspires me to write. That like I'm like, oh, words, they're so delicious. Like I just like it gets me going and starts my engine. Um, so poetry when I'm beginning a draft, and then I try and pick books specifically that I think will help inspire whatever book that I'm working on if I can. I mean, sometimes my reading schedule is a little bit too crazy, so I don't always have that luxury, but that's what I try and do. So like for my sixth book, which I just turned into my editor, I read Hamlet, I read Amityville Horror, I read Problems by Jade Sharma. And so like those were books where I'm like, that's like, I was like, I'm trying to get in a certain mindset. I'm trying to like pull things out. And so that was a really fun experience. It doesn't always, the stars don't always align in that way, but yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've read a little bit of poetry here and there, and it's one of those things that like it's a very visceral, like it's an emotional experience. So I can
Yeah.
definitely see where it's a jumping off point for like especially starting your novels. And are you an outliner? Like, do you outline really heavy, or do you just kind of go with the flow?
I wish I wish I was a good outliner. I am not, and it's I always hate myself at some point in the writing process because um I am just not an outliner. I can't like box myself in.
Yeah.
What I have done for so like the return and such sharp teeth, I kind of had beats.
Hmm.
Cackle, I just completely was like, I'm gonna wing it and see what happens. Um, Black Sheep was the first book because that was the first book that was already under, like I sold Such Sharp Teeth and a second book. And so I had to turn in an outline and I like turned in an outline and then I wrote the book beat for beat for the outline and I was miserable doing it. And the book came out, the draft came out shitty. And then I was like, I can't. And then I threw that out and then I sped through a different draft because I already kind of knew I already had enough to go off of, like
Yeah.
enough good stuff. I knew what wasn't working and I just kind of picked what was. Um, and for So Thirsty and book 6, which I just turned in, what I did was I wrote like what's basically cover copy, like the
Hmm.
back of a book, like
Yeah.
just 2 paragraphs of like kind of selling it. And then I
Hmm.
wrote like a general, this is what I think is going to happen. Um, like a couple pages of that and just turn that in. And then I turned in like 3 sample chapters so my editor could get a sense of the voice and like the
Yeah.
character. So that's what I've been doing. And it worked out well. So Thirsty was also a bit of a like, I got like halfway in and then I was like, what now? I figured it out, but like I think it helps to do organically. Um, because I discover things along the way.
Yeah.
And if I have it outlined, I, it's not fun for me. It's like reading instructions before you play a board game. It's like, oh, I
Yeah.
just want to know how to play and play. Like I'm like
You're too busy
I
trying to
just want to
follow the
roll the dice
rules.
and see what goes down. And so I that's where the magic happens for me. So I think there's like a happy medium for me where I'm like, okay, Rachel, you need to have some like you can't just like have a cool concept and be like, I'm gonna make this work because I will get halfway through the book and be like, I've run out of gas.
Hmm.
So I need to have like some idea of the arc and some idea of like deeper themes um and then I need to have some idea, but then I also need the freedom to be like, oh, what are they going to do now? Where are they going to go now? What's going to happen next? And like, oh, I've got an idea. Like this is where it feels natural for the characters to go. If I've already mapped it out,
Hmm.
I'm just going to take them from A to B without thinking about C. So, but
Yeah.
I wish I make my life difficult because I wish I could be like, this is what's going to happen, and then go da 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 done. But no, I'm yeah,
It's
I'm
so
not.
interesting to me to ask authors about whether they outline or not because it feels like there's really no middle ground. I feel like you're one of the first people that I've talked to who's like, well, I kind of do and I kind of don't. But a lot of people are like, I have either outlined this to hell and I know exactly where it's going to be, or they're like, I didn't and it was the most stressful thing of my life, or too much structure, like you said, is just not conducive to that writing environment. So there's always just it interests me so much because I mean, like I'm not a creative writer, I just read. So
Yeah,
it's very interesting to imagine how it all works behind the scenes. And kind of to piggyback off of that, you mentioned that you do read a lot. Like the one of the best things to do to keep your writing fresh is to read a lot. But do you ever experience like burnout with reading or
absolutely. I think we all do,
yeah,
and I think there's a lot of like shame around, like especially in the like book community, being like, I haven't read for a few, like I'm just like can't get into anything, or
yeah,
like, but it's so everybody has different tastes, everybody has different moods. Like I definitely burn out. Like I love to blurb books.
hmm,
It's such a joy and such an honor, but like I get to a point where I'm like, I need to read a book that I'm choosing for myself
yeah,
because otherwise, like it's the like mind frame that you're in when you pick it up, or like I'll be so busy with other things that I'll be like, this blurb book feels like the one thing that's going to tip me over the edge into being like so stressed out that I can't like
yeah.
sleep at night. So then I just won't read. But because I'll be too guilty to pick up something I want, like something else. Um, so yeah, definitely I definitely get burned out. Um, but yeah, then like picking up short stories or poetry or whatever, or just
Yeah.
like freeing myself of the pressure, which is
Mhm.
recent. I like before I would say yes to everything and then just like last end of the last year I got really burnt out on blurbing. And it's not that,
Yeah.
I love the books. It's not like the books weren't good. It was just
Yeah.
like you just did the like constant. I have the spreadsheet of all the
Hmm.
books that I need to blurb. And I open it up and I would just be like, oh, anytime you're opening Microsoft Excel, it's like your blood pressure just skyrockets. So
No,
like,
I relate
yeah.
very much to that. I mean, I don't blurb, I review, and I have on my notes app, I have like a checklist right now, and I've definitely probably overdone it for requesting
Yeah.
advanced copies. And it's like looking at the checklist is very stressful, although it is satisfying to check something off. But
Oh yeah.
um,
Checking something off a list is the best.
oh yes, absolutely. But yeah, it's like you said, like there's certain time, like especially lately, like there was like three or four slasher books that are releasing this summer, and I was like trying to read back to back, and I was like, this is not working. This is not, and it's not fair to the book or the author if I'm like trying to read and reflect on that book and I've just read like six other, like that's just not
Yeah.
fair. So then I, kind of either listen to like an audio or find something else to kind of break it up and that sort of thing. But I'm always curious about the author side of that and like how it affects like your writing, and especially since you're somebody who blurbs a lot, like how that works in that same way. But I very much relate to feeling overwhelmed and that guilt of saying no sometimes, but it is necessary. Um and speaking of books that you've blurbed, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Sean Hamill's The Dissonance, just while
Yes.
we
Thank
can,
you. Thank
because
you.
yes, I was so obsessed with that book. And I don't, when I say this, I don't mean to compare that book to these books, but it was like the same feeling inside me whenever I used to read like Percy Jackson as like a middle schooler.
You know what's so funny? I messaged him as soon as I finished reading it. I was like, this isn't anything like Harry Potter, but it gave me the
No,
feeling of
yes.
reading Harry Potter for the first time.
It
That
was.
like magical world where you're like, I want to be friends with all these people. Like it feels so real. It feels like you're
Mhm.
dropped into it.
Yeah, it's like the time that like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, and like the Hunger Games, like that world of like wanting to know like all like the proverbial like lore, like how did we
Yeah.
get here? How is this, like the whole shebang. And I like that book had me in a chokehold. And I've got like two or three other people to read it, and they've also loved it. And I'm like trying to spread the good word of the
I
dissonance
know.
because we need a sequel.
We need it. So as soon as I was like crying when I finished,
Yes, oh
I
my
like
God.
told Sean, I was like, I need like no pressure. Hope you're doing well. I need a sequel. And now I'm like, I need every person I know to buy this book because like then he'll be forced to write a sequel
Yeah,
if I don't
absolutely.
like chain him up in my basement,
Pull a misery
Pennywise
on him.
style. Like, please, please, please. It's so good. His imagination is so incredible. I just like marvel at his imagination. And yeah, I'm obsessed, obsessed. I'm so happy that you're equally obsessed because I'm just
Oh,
because I read it so long ago that I was like, it doesn't come out for a long time. And I'm just like alone with my obsession.
I know. And like I normally stay away from like fantasy because
Mm,
I like a really hard time conceptualizing world building that's
mm,
not rooted in our real world. Like that's why I try to stick more with horror and some sci-fi because there's typically like a thread of reality in there, right?
right.
And so when I picked up the distance, I was really worried that I was gonna have a hard time getting into it initially because it was like, there is a magic system involved. And when I tell you it was the easiest thing for
Yep.
me to get into, and I told him that I was like, this is like it like was like brain. I don't like I just stimulated my brain in all the right ways and it just made so much sense. And it just felt, I don't know, I loved it. And I love what he did with like kind of the confrontation of religion and magic systems. I
Yeah.
was like, that's so brilliant. Oh, that's so smart. But oh, I can't say enough good things. On that note though, is there anything else that you've read recently that you've really loved?
So I think my like somebody asked me the other day, and I'm just gonna borrow my like it's hard, it's so hard. I just read Stay on the Line by Clay McLeod Chapman
Oh
today, which
yeah.
was
Mhm.
great. I love
Yeah.
Clay, love Clay. And then Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, amazing. That's coming out in January. Um, love that. Um, American Rapture by CJ Lead. I know
Oh my
that one
God.
too.
Yeah.
I feel like we have the same taste because we
Yeah.
also love like Liz Caron's books. I love Liz Caron's books.
Yes.
And then An Academy for Liars by
Hmm.
Alexis Henderson. She's another one where like her imagination, I'm just like, how, what, like, how did that come out? Like, how did you think of that? If you like The Dissonance, I think you'll like An Academy for Liars.
Yeah.
I'm just such a huge Alexis Henderson fan. Um, so those are like some highlights for me. But I'm sure I'm forgetting, people are like, what have you read like recently? And my mind just like
Oh
goes
yeah.
blank.
I immediately have to
Books?
pull up
Oh,
Goodreads because I'm like, me, books, what?
yeah.
Yeah. But
Oh,
no, the only thing I haven't read any Alexis Henderson stuff yet, so I need to get on that. I'm actually talking to Clay next week, the following. Um, and I need to read his Kill Your Darling. That's gonna be coming out from Bad
mm,
Hand, that little novella. But I really, really enjoyed Stay on the Line. I love that he gave us like those little chapbooks from Shortwave and Stay on the Line in between like his big novel releases.
yeah.
I like very and
Just
then like
steady feeding us.
yeah, and like Nat Cassidy did the same thing. He
Oh,
casually
yeah.
drops like two chapbooks and like, well,
Oh,
I
and
mean,
he sent me When the Wolf Comes Home. I read a draft and the draft was incredible. So I'm like, I cannot wait to read it in its final form. So
I
um,
cannot express how excited I am for Wake Up and Open Your Eyes and then When the Wolf Comes Home. Those two are
they're
like
both the best humans, the best. I just am such like I'm their biggest fans
I
and they
love
happen to
that.
be my friends. Yeah, I'm very lucky um that like I can be as fanatic as I am. And it's like it's cool because we're friends. Like with Sean, I don't know Sean as well as I know them. And I'm like, I feel like Sean hopefully appreciates my love for The Dissonance and it's not like, um,
No, I I think he
I should have made that
does.
Annie Wilkes joke because now he's definitely going to be worried. Um, I'm going to show up to Dallas in September and he's going to have like a little taser in his bag. But yeah, I love both of those books. Like, cannot say enough good things. Deliver on all the hype, which
That's
they'll be mad at me
awesome.
for saying, but it's true. It's true.
Yeah. I think it's one of the most like wholesome things to see everybody being so nice. I've talked about it before with Angela, but like seeing everybody being so nice and like I've also been treated with a lot of kindness, like seeing that in the horror community in particular has been one of the most interesting things because I was talking to Angela Sylvain about this in particular. Like you would think that we're a bunch of like really dark and depressed goths that
Oh no.
that only listen to The Cure and hate everybody, but it's like genuinely the nicest people that I've
Yeah.
been able to interact with and
And I
learn
tell
from
you,
and
the more messed up stuff they write, the nicer they
yeah.
are.
Yeah, Clay
Like
is like the perfect
the
example
most
of that.
twisted, disgusting, vile things, murder, death, spatter. Nicest people.
Yeah,
Nicest people.
absolutely. I'm all for it. I think it's absolutely great. And so you brought this up. We're gonna kind of start wrapping things up. Now you mentioned your book tour that's coming up in September. How many cities are you hitting again?
Ooh, Brooklyn, uh, Spring Lake, New Jersey, Fredericksburg, Maryland, right outside of DC, Dallas, St. Louis, Chicago, and then Plainville, Massachusetts. So
Okay.
six.
Six,
Sorry,
yeah.
I just count on my
Yeah,
fingers like
no.
a toddler.
Did you wait? But the important question is, do you have your outfits planned for all of
Oh
those?
yeah,
Yeah.
of course I do.
I love
I'm
that
so
so
extra.
much.
We have such little control as authors over like anything
Yeah.
once done with the book that like and I'm a control freak. So I'm like,
Hmm.
what can I control? And it's like, I can control my outfit. And so I always ridiculous, but it's fun. Most days I'm in sweatpants and like, so anytime I leave my house, I'm like, I'm gonna trick these people into thinking that I'm put together.
Oh no, I love that. I think it's awesome. I'm excited to see the outfits, obviously.
Thanks. I
And then you mentioned that you just turned in edits on book number 6. Is there
just turned
any
in the draft. I'm
draft?
waiting
Sorry.
for edits.
Sorry.
Pray
Sorry,
for
sorry.
me. Pray for
Yeah.
me.
Is there anything that you can say about that yet, or is it still pretty tight under wraps?
I think I like want to. I'm like, I want to
Yeah.
talk all about it. But I think the tease of having read Hamlet,
I
Amityville
was
Horror, and Problems
yeah,
by James
I was
Cinema.
trying to put it together in my head,
Yeah,
but
that's my tease. That's what I can
okay.
tease so far.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good to know. Well, is there anything else on the horizon that I'm not aware of that you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. It's just gonna be like me. Uh, the next few months of my life are gonna be insane. I'm gonna go on tour, which I'm so excited about, and so Thirsty's gonna come out. Excited, obviously nervous, and then uh batten down the hatches and churn out the edits for book 6, which will hopefully be out in September of 2025. So, and then on to the next. So
It's very,
trying to
very
stay on the book
exciting.
of spooky season um
Yeah.
trajectory.
I
But
do always look forward to that Rachel Harrison book in the fall.
thank
That's always
you.
a nice little look forward to moment. All right, Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I absolutely have enjoyed getting to read So Thirsty and talk to you about it. I really think that it's another solid addition to your catalog, and I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy it and resonate with it, whether it's on the basis of shame, guilt, and glutton, or just because it's an entertaining vampire novel. You kind of hit all of the notes on that one. So I'm absolutely thrilled for you, and thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was great chatting.